Hey guys, welcome back. I'm going to be putting together my final predictions for the upcoming New Hampshire primary, hoping to do a little bit better than what I did in the first round in Iowa. And of course, I'm going to continue to use the popular vote in each of these instances as a bit more straightforward in a primary than a caucus, but that's the standard that we're going to be using here in terms of tracking the accuracy of these predictions. So actually for New Hampshire, again, I'm going to be putting together my top 5, but only officially counting the top 3, and that's what I'm going to continue to do throughout this entire process, officially tracking my first, second, and third choice for each of these respective caucuses in primaries. Now, I think New Hampshire is a little bit more straightforward in terms of the top option, but behind that, I still think there can be some shifting around in some of these other areas. So starting in 5th place, I still think it's going to be Amy Klobuchar. That was my 5th place prediction back in Iowa. She has shown more strength in these early states of Iowa and New Hampshire than probably anyone was expecting just a couple of months ago. But nonetheless, she's still polling relatively weak in terms of the national picture of this primary. And even if she does a little bit better than expected in New Hampshire like she did in Iowa, still finishing in that 4th to 5th place area and then going into the next results of Nevada and South Carolina, where she isn't expected to have all that much success. I'm not sure what the path forward is for somebody like Senator Klobuchar. Now, I give her respect, and I actually think she is going up in the polls in some of these areas, given the fact that on the debate stage she comes off as very genuine. She knows what lane she's trying to occupy in terms of getting that centrist moderate vote. She's not trying to appeal to the more progressive and left wing of the Democratic base, and some of these other centrists and moderates have been trying to do that, and it just doesn't come off as being all that genuine on the debate stage. So I think that is potentially a reason why she's been able to rise up a bit in the polls, maybe more than what some people had expected coming through this process. But again, I don't really see a clear path forward for Klobuchar, especially with her national poll still relatively weak and likely the upcoming results after New Hampshire not looking all that great for her. But she could possibly surprise and even move up into the 4th place or even 3rd place area given some of these late polls that we've seen out of New Hampshire, but still going to be slotting her into that 5th place position. Now, probably the biggest debate I had was between 3rd and 4th place. So in New Hampshire, I think 4th place, it's going to be Joe Biden. I was expecting more from him out of Iowa, and the fact that he so significantly underperformed the polls is indicating to me that the people that are responding to these polls are perhaps not so enthusiastic about actually turning up and showing out to vote for Joe Biden, or it could also just be the type of sampling that they're doing in these polls that is maybe showing Biden having a bit more strength than what he's actually having on the ground on election day. We'll see if that is the case. It can be a difference and a contrast between a caucus and a primary as well. We'll see if he's able to underperform or overperform what the polls are saying this time around. But it was actually kind of interesting in the debate that we had the other day in New Hampshire, where essentially right out of the gate you had Joe Biden up there saying, I don't really expect to do all that well in this state. I think Bernie is likely to go on and run away with this thing, but we're in this for the long haul. So essentially throwing in the towel before the voters are even coming out and supporting him. And I'm not sure what kind of strategy he's going with in that instance where he's already having a problem. We saw this in Iowa with getting that enthusiastic support to come out and vote for him on election day, and to say that you're not expecting to do very well in a state, I don't think that's what you want to be telling your potential voters in New Hampshire. That might depress them even more than what might have been the case in just a typical scenario. So I think Biden potentially comes in 4th place. It actually wouldn't even completely surprise me if he fell all the way back to 5th place with the more strength that we've seen from Klobuchar in some of these closing polls, but he still also has a potential ceiling of getting in that 2nd to 3rd place range. So you don't exactly know where Biden might be finishing, but again, given how weak his performance was in Iowa, I think that carries over into New Hampshire, and he ends up getting 4th place. So then in 3rd place, the first one that I'm going to be writing down here is Elizabeth Warren. I think it helps the fact that Massachusetts is the neighboring state to New Hampshire. Warren is putting an effort to have success in New Hampshire like she was able to outperform a bit in Iowa in contrast to what the polls were saying. I think Warren is hurt by the fact that she's kind of splitting some of that progressive vote with Bernie Sanders, and the fact that Sanders is likely to have a lot of success in the state, being neighboring to Vermont, and how well Bernie did in 2016. That just makes it a bigger uphill climb for Warren to potentially have a tough time getting into that upper tier. And I also question the potential path forward for Elizabeth Warren, where she gets third place in Iowa. If she gets around a third place finish in New Hampshire, and then she's not expected to do extremely well in areas like Nevada and South Carolina potentially, and maybe she's just waiting around until Super Tuesday. Maybe she's hoping to surprise in that instance, but it looks like it's a relatively difficult path for Warren going forward, especially with so much of that progressive vote coalescing behind Senator Sanders, and also to an extent, Pete Buttigieg rising in the poll is actually somewhat taking away not just from Biden, but also from Warren with those upper middle class, college educated white type voters that Warren was doing so well with and is still getting a decent amount of that vote. But also Mayor Pete has been able to kind of bring along some more of that coalition than what the Warren campaign would hope. So then moving on from my third place, in second place, I'm going with Pete Buttigieg. I definitely undervalued Mayor Pete, what he was able to do in the Iowa caucus. He's putting so much resources into having success in these first two states. That is a factor, clearly. He significantly outperformed the polls. Now, Pete Buttigieg is yet another one of these candidates where they have this early state effort into Iowa and New Hampshire, but then beyond that, it doesn't appear like he's going to do anything in the way of have success in Nevada, South Carolina, and many of these Super Tuesday states following that he could have issues with, but he's getting his name out there on a national platform. He's getting all this free media. Perhaps he has ambitions in his political career going into the future, and it can't help to be at least talked about in that upper tier of this Democratic primary as we go through the early portion of primary season. So we'll see what the future holds for Mayor Pete Buttigieg, but he's taken a significant leap in the polls in New Hampshire following what was a better than expected result in Iowa. I think that carries over. He likely is peeling off a bit of support from individuals like a Joe Biden and an Elizabeth Warren. We'll see if that actually carries over into a second place finish, but I think that it's a reasonable expectation that he could finish in that second place slot. And then no big surprise here in first place, Bernie Sanders. If Bernie doesn't end up getting first place in New Hampshire, it would be one of the biggest surprises from the early contest, other than maybe Joe Biden not winning South Carolina. It is the neighboring state, New Hampshire, obviously, to Vermont. If we look back to 2016, Bernie Sanders got about 60,000 more votes than Hillary Clinton, picking up over 60% of the vote, in contrast to Clinton, who was around 37%. The rallies are going really well in New Hampshire. He's got a strong ground game. It just seems like with the momentum that Sanders has been building, not necessarily just because of the success he had in Iowa, of the overall number of votes that he was able to pick up, but surging in the polls even leading up into the Iowa caucus. And that has also been the case in New Hampshire, where almost universally and consistently with every single New Hampshire poll that comes out, Bernie Sanders has been in the lead, and usually by a decent margin. I think this is pretty cut and dry, straightforward position. Bernie Sanders finishing in first place in a state where it's likely to be one of his best states out of every single one that you take a look at. Other than Vermont, it might be difficult to point to a particular state where you'd expect Bernie Sanders to have as much success as he's likely to have coming up here in the New Hampshire primary. But with so many individuals and candidates still running and splitting that vote, it's not like he's going to run away with this and get more than 50% of the vote, but still probably finishing in first place and by a decent margin. I'd say if he wins by maybe around the 5 to 10 percentage point range, that would be really solid. And if he's able to win by more than 10 percentage points, the difference between him and second place, then that would be an excellent sign for the Vermont senator moving into the next result, the Nevada caucus. So those are my final New Hampshire predictions that I'm putting together here, kind of giving a little bit of a discussion as to why I think each candidate is going to finish first, second, third, fourth, or fifth. And just to quickly recap, in first place, Bernie Sanders. In second place, Mayor Pete Buttigieg. In third place, Elizabeth Warren. Fourth place, Joe Biden. Fifth place, Amy Klobuchar. I feel like the top two choices in this instance are a bit more safe in the prediction than third through fifth place. Wouldn't be surprised to see some shuffling around in that instance, or maybe even Elizabeth Warren or Joe Biden could surprise and actually surpass Pete Buttigieg. Maybe the rise that he's had in the New Hampshire polls are more artificial than what actually turns out on election day in New Hampshire. So we'll also see if that is the case or not. I compared what the polls were saying to the actual result that we had in Iowa. Made a video about that if you want to check it out. I'll put that down in the video description. I'll also do that in New Hampshire after the fact when we get the final result, kind of comparing it to what the polls were saying just to see the direction that we're getting in, how these candidates are performing in contrast to the average of those state-specific polling results. So again, guys, I appreciate you stopping by to continue to get more of this election coverage type videos where I go through my predictions, recap the predictions, track the pledged delegates, go over polls, etc., etc. There's just so much going on right now. I'm going to be continuing to release many videos going forward throughout this process. A very exciting time in the Democratic 2020 presidential primary. Can't wait to get these results. Hope they come out a bit quicker than what we had in Iowa. And I'll see you guys back here for the recap of the results that we get from the New Hampshire primaries and also some more content leading up into that particular contest.